Imagine a man so deep in debt that his creditors follow him to the Senate steps. Not with threats, but with hope. Hope that this walking financial disaster might somehow survive long enough to repay them. This was Julius Caesar before he was a conqueror. Before the Rubicon, before Gaul, before the legends, he was Rome's most spectacular debtor, and his ledger wasn't a record of failure, it was a weapon being sharpened. We're taught that empires fall to invaders or rot from within. We're not taught they can be purchased on credit. Caesar didn't just conquer Rome, he leveraged it. He turned personal insolvency into imperial collateral, and in doing so, executed history's first and greatest leveraged buyout. The Republic didn't collapse. It was foreclosed upon. Welcome to the Historical Audit, where we find the missing pieces behind history's greatest events. In the Rome of the 1st century BC, money was the real constitution. The Senate wasn't just a political body, it was a board of directors for the world's most powerful corporation. To play the game, you needed capital: old money, land, slaves. Caesar had the name but not the fortune. His family was aristocratic but cash, poor. So he did something radical, borrowed on a scale that terrified everyone. By his late 30s, Caesar's debts were astronomical. Plutarch claims he owed 25 million sesterces before leaving for Spain, a sum that could pay 50,000 legionaries for a year. He wasn't just in debt, he was a systemic risk. What's fascinating is how he weaponized this vulnerability. Most men would hide from creditors. Caesar invited them deeper in. He spent borrowed money on public spectacles so lavish, they bankrupted his rivals' imaginations. He bought political offices outright. He bribed juries, funded street gangs, and created a political machine that ran on pure credit. His creditors were wealthy senators and equestrians, and they faced a terrible dilemma. If they called in their loans, he'd collapse and they'd lose everything. If they kept funding him, they might get repaid if he reached high office. They became hostages to his ambition. The genius was in the scale. Caesar borrowed so much that his failure would cause a financial crisis. He made himself too big to fail 17 centuries before the term existed. When a conservative senator criticized his spending, Caesar supposedly replied, "If I need to borrow another 50 million to reach my goals, would you lend it to me?" It wasn't a question. It was a threat. The deeper he sank, the more power he gained. Look at our world today. Where do you see this same principle in action? Where does massive debt become not a weakness, but a form of power that forces everyone to cooperate? Comment below with the most obvious modern parallel you can identify. The Senate's solution was classic Roman politics, which was to promote the problem away. They gave Caesar the governorship of Gaul, hoping the barbarians would solve their Caesar problem. It was their greatest miscalculation. Caesar didn't see Gaul as a province to administer. He saw it as a balance sheet to raid. For 8 years, from 58 BC, he conducted not just a military campaign, but the most aggressive asset-stripping operation in antiquity. Every battle was an acquisition. Every surrendered tribe was a subsidiary to be liquidated. The numbers are staggering. He claims to have enslaved 1 million Gauls. At contemporary prices, that represented perhaps 200 million sesterces, which was 8 times his starting debt. He looted temple gold, imposed crushing annual tributes, and seized land. Gaul wasn't conquered, it was monetized. The wealth flowed back to Rome in a golden torrent, but it didn't go to the treasury. It went through Caesar's hands. This is where the financial engineering became brilliant. Caesar used the Gallic wealth for 2 strategic purposes. First, he repaid all his debts. But he didn't just repay, he transformed debtors into clients. A senator who received full repayment of a massive loan didn't just get his money back, he owed Caesar a political favor. The relationship inverted completely. Second, and more importantly, he bought an army. Not with patriotism or loyalty, but with cash. Roman soldiers earned about 225 denarii a year. Caesar gave bonuses of 5,000 denarii, which was way more than 20 years' pay. He promised the best farmland in Italy upon retirement. He created what economists would call a vertical integration. Gallic wealth became soldier loyalty that became political power. The legions stopped being servants of the state and became shareholders in Caesar, Incorporated. Their retirement funds depended on his continued success. In 49 BC, the Senate finally understood what they'd created. They ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. This wasn't politics. It was a corporate raid. They were trying to dilute his shares before he could execute a takeover. Crossing the Rubicon was the equivalent of a hostile tender offer. Caesar wasn't just defying the Senate, He was refusing to be acquired. The civil war that followed was less a military conflict than a corporate restructuring battle. Pompey represented the old board of directors, trying to maintain control. Caesar was the activist investor with the backing of key stakeholders, which was his army and enough capital from Gallic gold to force a change in management. His tactics were financial warfare. When he took Rome, his first move wasn't to execute enemies but to seize the state treasury. He didn't steal it, he leveraged it. He used public funds to finance his private takeover bid. As he moved through Italy, he forgave debts in towns that supported him. He imposed crushing fines on those that didn't. He was restructuring Rome's balance sheet in real time, making entire communities dependent on his financial mercy. The final victory at Munda wasn't just military. It was the completion of the acquisition. Caesar returned to Rome not just as conqueror, but as majority shareholder. The old senatorial class was bankrupt, literally and politically. They had bet on Pompey and lost. Now they owed their survival to Caesar's clemency. He controlled the debt markets, the treasury, and the army. He was the bank, the government, and the security force all in one. This pattern feels familiar, doesn't it? Where in modern geopolitics or corporate warfare do you see similar tactics, using financial pressure rather than direct conflict to force compliance? How is economic power being weaponized today? I'm curious about your perspective. With control secured, Caesar began the merger integration. He didn't just rule, he restructured. He expanded the Senate from 600 to 900, packing it with loyalists, the former soldiers, provincial elites, even freedmen. This wasn't generosity. It was changing the board composition. The old shareholders were diluted, and the new ones brought in. His most revolutionary act was a mass debt restructuring. He canceled all interest accrued during the civil wars and decreed that debts be repaid at pre-war property values. This was economic shock therapy. It wiped out the creditor class that had dominated Rome for centuries, and liberated the debtor class that comprised most of the population. Overnight, Caesar went from conqueror to economic savior for millions. He funded massive public works like temples, forums, drainage projects, but every project bore his name. He was branding the corporation. Even the calendar was rebranded. The Julian calendar literally stamped time itself with his authority. The assassination on the Ides of March was a failed boardroom coup. The old guard senators, the displaced creditors, tried to retake control by eliminating the CEO. But they misunderstood what they were dealing with. They killed the man, but the corporate structure remained. The system of leveraging debt into power, of monetizing conquest into loyalty, had been perfected. Octavian, Caesar's heir, didn't avenge a father figure. He completed the merger. He formalized what Caesar had built, the Principate, where the emperor wasn't just a ruler but the ultimate creditor, the source of all patronage, the final arbiter of all financial disputes. The state and the ruler's personal wealth became deliberately blurred, a direct legacy of Caesar's original debt-fueled rise. The missing piece in Caesar's story isn't his military genius or political skill. It's his financial innovation. He discovered that in a society built on credit and obligation, the ultimate power doesn't go to the strongest general or the most eloquent senator. It goes to whoever controls the ledger. He proved that debt, at sufficient scale, isn't a chain, it's a leverage. And when you owe enough people enough money, they don't own you. You own them because your survival becomes their necessity. The Roman Republic didn't fall to barbarians or moral decay. It was acquired in a debt-financed takeover. The down payment was Gallic blood. The collateral was Rome's future. The interest was paid in human liberty. Caesar's real legacy isn't the battles he won, but the financial instrument he perfected, which was the art of using other people's money to buy the world, then charging everyone rent to live in it. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe, share with your friends, and join the audit.